All right, well, welcome everyone to the first of 12 webinars in our series called the Cannabis Tech Audit. I am joined by Rachel and David from Michael and McCumber and Dom Gayton from E2B Technologies. We are running a 12-part webinar series this year to highlight some of the thought leadership behind people, process, and technology. We know that they all three interplay very well together, or sometimes not, but the goal being one should depend on the other. And we'll be asking some questions and having some guests along the way that kind of shed light on how these work, where they don't work, where we can kind of make improvements. To kick off, I will introduce Dom. He's our VP of Strategy at E2B Technologies. Been in the cannabis space for quite a while. Started as a CTO at a third-party transport out of Colorado, and had moved over to LeafLink for a handful of years prior to coming to the E2B team. So he's got a really great depth of knowledge from the seed to the sale of the product. And I'll turn it over to David to introduce he and Rachel from Michael and McCumber.
Yeah, so Rachel and I, and in fact, pretty much everybody in this room has been in both cannabis and ERP broadly for over a decade. And prior to that, working in ERP systems in different industries, both regulated and non-regulated. So we really have a sense of how these solutions work and also the needs of cannabis. And we're extremely passionate about the subject and how we can serve businesses through these different digital solutions. But we're also really passionate about how use of those ends up a challenge. So with all of us here, especially Rachel has a really deep understanding of the financial aspect of these systems and really being able to marry the business and its finances to how those are tracked, reported, and the challenges that are there. And we spent a lot of time implementing for small, medium, and large multi-state operators. So we got a real sense of how there's a marriage between technology and then the people and the processes that they serve. So we're really excited to be teaming up with with E2B and the Canna Hub solution and the opportunities it has to address some problems. And as we're going into these, we actually decided there's so much to talk about on each one of these. Let's take each one of those kind of challenges and let's spread them across 12 different conversations. I think what you're going to hear is there's a lot of very common themes. We're going to talk about challenges around trust. It's going to come up a lot. We're going to talk about how that relates to change management and how it relates to regulation and how those are changing. But there's going to be real keys that go all the way through, and then there are going to be unique topics, and today's going to be one of them, that will help to both touch on those recurring themes as well as to address very specific pain points. So today we get to pull out one of these that I think everybody can appreciate, no matter which department, whether it's fully vertical integrated organization, or if you really are just sitting in one seat on the bus, so to speak, and that is that there's a struggle with certain systems or with use of your systems to really trust the information that's in there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a couple of the buckets of those that those challenges are going to fall into. We're going to explore some of the problems that occur, and Rachel and Dom are going to be the ones who kind of answer questions that I've thrown out at them that really let us kind of talk about what are some of these familiar problems. And our goal is that those challenges are those that resonate with you, and that we're able to talk about ways that we get to help customers and partners address those. So with that in mind, let's dig into talking about the kind of the categories of where these problems tend to fall into. And Don, why don't you get us kicked off? How do you see these problems getting categorized?
Uh, a lot of times, look, I think we've joked about this in the kind of preparation of this, is your data lying to you? And as somebody that comes from a finance and data background, the technology itself isn't inherently set up to provide a false answer, right? The technology has been vetted, has been designed, has been tested, and so more often than not, we see a gap of documentation or understanding of where are some of those key activities? Where do they originate? What's my source of truth for a variety of different business contexts? I may have 110 wholesale orders that show up as 100 fulfilled orders in my ERP that are 90 transfer manifests that equal 80 invoices. And if I don't have continuity across each one of those departments, both the process and the tech of where did my product originate from? How is that handed off and created into an order? Starts to draw lines of people doing work in disparate systems without really keeping a connective tissue. And so not fundamentally that the data is coming out wrong, but more often than not, it's the handoff of what did the data do and how was I anticipating it coming out?
Yeah.
One of the things that we find is frequently being brought up in conversations that we're having with people is that they can't trust their data. And so we wanted to talk a little bit today about why trust fails in data. There's two parts to the trust and the data failing. The assumption here is that the technology is working as it's designed to work, and it's been tested by a bunch of different companies, by a bunch of different people that are using the technology, and that it should be doing the job that you want it to do. So when the information that you are getting out of your technology does not seem to be providing answers to your questions or seems to be inconsistent, what we start to find happens is that there starts to be a lack of trust in that information. When there's a lack of trust in that information, what ends up happening is that people stop using that information to make strategic decisions or to make business decisions in general. There starts to be a deterioration of business intelligence for the company, and that can undermine a company's ability to move forward. So the question becomes, why does this trust fail? Now, I like to look at it from the very personal and psychological perspective, which is that if I am basing my activity in a specific department on the data being there for me and using that data to confirm what I am doing, to give me feedback, etc., and then the data that comes out of another department that should align with my data doesn't, I start to feel like there's something that is, my trust in the other department's data starts to struggle. I feel very trustworthy of my own data because I know how I'm accumulating, et cetera, but I start to not so much trust theirs. And what we find this happens in companies is this starts to create a siloing effect between departments. The siloing effect in departments can then cause there to be even bigger problems for the company. There starts to be a lack of communication. It starts to extend the amount of time it takes to make decisions, to complete reconciliations, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things we wanted to really address in this is, why does the trust in the data fail? What is the creep and the inconsistent workflows that can cause this to happen?
Yeah. And then you kind of have it end up with a Venn diagram here of people, process, and tech. The people are starting to struggle with the trust maybe between different departments, and the process is starting to struggle because people maybe don't feel like it's serving them or don't know how to use it. And then, of course, what's the outcome? The tech is really going to struggle. It's not being used properly, and it can't give any of those people what they need, and you just have this cycle. So let's dig into just talking about some of the problems. And I think something interesting, we were prepping for this webinar, was kind of thinking about the problems themselves. Sometimes we think about a problem and you say, what's the problem? Oh, this number in this spot is wrong. Okay, yeah, I mean, that sounds like a problem. And certainly if you get systems where when you add up all the numbers, they're wrong, that looks like that's the problem. But if we kind of go deeper, we start thinking more from less of what and more towards like how or why. And that's where we started finding, hey, there's more, there's a little bit deeper if we scratch this, than just scratching the surface. So Rach, if we want to dive in first on some of like describing some of the problems that we end up experiencing.
I have a use case that really starts to kind of cover several different things, both the people, the process, and the technology side of it. It comes around costing of product. Of course, so you're trying to get the margins to understand what makes you money and what doesn't. The cost of a product is very important. So I'm going to deal with the tech side first, because for the most part, we don't really see problems in technology specifically. In other words, the technology not working the way it's designed to work. However, what we do see oftentimes is that when you start to have departments that are focused just on the technology that serves their specific department, that you start to have kind of the blind man and the elephant. They are only looking at the technology they're used to working in, and it might only provide part of the question. A good example of this is going to be if you're vertically integrated cultivation, manufacturing, and retail, with your retail company being separate from the other two, and the cost of the product that the retail team is looking at is only inside of their POS system, they may be seeing the cost that is the result of the manufacturing entity selling to the retail entity at standard wholesale price. And so therefore, the cost that comes in is all standard wholesale cost, even for their own internal brands. As a result, you start to have an incorrect cost understanding from the retail perspective, not because POS is wrong, it's just the POS is an incomplete picture. So that's where we see it in the tech side. On the processes and people side, it can really be more about who's entering the information and how the information is being structured, what is being included in the information. So for example, if you're only including the cost of materials, but not the cost of labor and overhead, in terms of on the cultivation and manufacturing side, you can also have an incomplete picture of cost. And again, what can start to happen here is that an operations team might be thinking that they're doing a really great job on producing a cost-effective product, but their total cost for the product doesn't add up to what finance says it is in a month, because they're just looking at the material cost and finance is looking, including labor and overhead. So that's where it's coming into the people that are looking at and the process associated with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dom, if you're going to tackle maybe the e-commerce or the retail analytics side, how did these problems, what are examples of these problems?
Yeah, I think we see it a ton when we start to think about some of the market analytics provider. Oftentimes, it's a matter of I'm using analytics tool A versus analytics tool B, when in reality, they're both using a similar foundational data set. And so it's the understanding of how are they processing the information, right? So if I have an analytics tool that is based off of scraping e-commerce data, and I'm projecting a future, or I'm forecasting a future of a behavior, right? The system is set up the correct way, but the usage or the understanding of how that number might be derived, I think most often, the common refrain is, I looked at system, it was way off from the one data point that I'm used to looking at. Therefore, its entirety is wrong. And so an understanding of saying, where did they get the information from? How are they extrapolating it? How are they transforming it? How are they making signal through the noise of all of the thousands of data points? And then what is my right response from that? And so it's the hammer for a nail problem, right? If you only have a hammer, everything becomes a nail problem. It is the understanding of how I'm going to use these tools. We saw it all the time at LeafLink, right? Where a sales persona is going to look at all of the orders that they created in a period. Well, it's from, as Rachel was talking about, from a finance perspective, there's a thing called gap accounting and accrual accounting where ship date matters. And so if I don't have, the foundations of where did I pull it from? What filters did I apply? How am I using it? The result of the number can be a very nuanced use case and output.
Yep. Yep. It's an interesting one when we look at the same set of data from two different companies or two different departments, who you would just automatically think logic dictates that these two things will align, and they don't. And so then everybody's left scratching their head. I think it's really important as we're looking at solving problems. Identifying the problem correctly is a key to it. It's not a nail to your point. And so really knowing, hey, do we have a problem with data? Do we have an interdepartmental or an inter company challenge? I think those end up being really key. So when we then, let's say we have a sense of what some of these problems are, but they are going to express themselves. Those problems will show up in certain ways with certain signals, and ultimately saying, "Hey, this is indeed the problem you have," um, before you start tackling it. So, Rach, if you can start us off, what are some of the signals, either from any of the three buckets, process, people, or tech? How did some of these show up for us?
Yeah, I think really what we start to see is that when you know that you've got a huge red flag, and this is kind of not an early warning sign, but kind of like a, hey, you're kind of at a critical point, is when you start finding that people are creating separate receptacles of information and data. So if you have people who are using the system they're required to use by the company, but then is creating a separate database, say in Excel or off in Google Sheets or off on their own for just their people to use of data, I do think that you have a real issue with having lost the narrative. This is no longer going to be a cohesive situation. The business intelligence will no longer be cohesive and collaborative. And I think at that point, you need to start looking at multiple fronts that you have lost the narrative for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. You hit on a great point there on the one previous there, David. And I think it's an objective question, right? Do I truly understand the problem? I think there's a Albert Einstein quote that, you had an hour to save the world. What would the proper allocation of time be? And I think he says something, I'd spend 58 minutes understand the problem and 2 minutes on the solution. And so the understanding of a problem, I think, again, as you think about the narrative, is ultimately what we're doing across people, process, and explaining a narrative. Data is intended to be objective. It's supposed to be the unifying factor where we can all get on the same sheet of music and have a truthful, objective conversation. And oftentimes it's just, again, how are we using it? Contract manufacturers, it's not uncommon for, hey, I have a license, I own an asset, and I want to produce units for a great brand, West Coast brand, or a great New York brand in my home state. And if I'm using a wholesale platform, Leaf Trade, LeafLink, Apex, any of these applications, and for the brand that I want to build for, I have a royalty agreement that is based off of the number of net sales that I do per month and a percentage on it. I should probably be very specific with them about the data that I'm pulling out and where the number is derived from. Oftentimes we see finance teams or sales teams do this month-end reconciliation process where I'm using the same data output. Fine, again, get to my earlier point of order create date versus ship date, a sales function versus a finance function. By the time that the finance team is receiving the intended output, do they have a limited data set? Are they looking at a different sheet of music to understand what is that true royalty payment? That only causes more high touch, high friction processes. And to Rachel's point about people abandoning the system, the technology where most of they're transactional systems of record, right? And so that's what they do. They store the transaction. And so, am I creating a process and a workaround to modify and accommodate that data? Or was there a process where maybe the data points that I'm using or the way that I'm sharing that information makes more sense?
Yeah. Yeah, there are very clear signals through each one of those examples. And Rachel, I think you did a really great job of hey, of getting those signals. Are you guys running to your own spreadsheets for the same data that's supposed to be in your system? Are you guys using completely different data sets for the same? Like Dawn, the other day, you said, we make this pen right here, but we're all looking at different spreadsheets about that pen when it's supposed to live in our system. So let's now say, okay, we've identified what that looks like. We can estimate if we have a problem based on some of these signals. But how do we rebuild trust? And Rach, why don't you get us started?
So I think Don brought up a really good point on the last slide and kind of plays right into this, which is that I think that what you see as the red flag of losing a narrative usually indicates where you should be starting to rebuild the trust in the numbers. So if you have people using completely separate spreadsheets or something like that, oftentimes that means that their needs are not being met in the current system, either because of the architecture of the system, because of the processes of the system, et cetera. And there's several ways to more deeply diagnose this, and without going through an exhaustive list or getting really deep into it, some really great ways to start is to write out what your SOPs are for the process for that. A lot of times what the SOP should not be just a set of work instructions for one software. It should be the entire process across all the softwares that it impacts, across all the different departments that it impacts. What this will do then is it will start to show where you haven't taken into consideration the goals, needs, or functions of a certain department, a certain group of people, a certain software, et cetera, or where the information coming out of one software is supposed to be used by another group that cannot use it appropriately. And this will then also help start to break down the silos between the departments and get them talking together, because they all have to collaborate on this SOP. And so I think that's a really good place to start to decipher exactly where there's starting to be a break in information gathering that is creating problems with your numbers.
Yeah. And you got to start somewhere, right? I think we'll all find that as you go through and you see the signals of challenges, you start seeing like there's multiple signals here. So Dom, if we're gonna start somewhere, what's like right at the surface almost always going to be a part of a solution, whether it's in people, process, or tech?
Yeah, I love that you have on here, right, is the, what's right. Oftentimes, right, we are looking for the right answer. Sometimes, it's really important to just get the wrong ones off so that you have a surface area of which to build upon. So what am I working on now? I think every operator would be successful in saying, here is the product catalogs, the products that I make, the things that I, all the materials that go to make this product, these 40 products that I manage, or the 30 that I, 300 that I co-pack for. I think everybody would have the ability to start from an area that they believe to be truth. And, kind of to Rachel's point around, the people in the process, the definition of those SOPs, right? So how did I get it? Did I document myself? Hey, I went into X system, I used this date range, and I got to this view of the world of my product catalog. And as I start to move through all of the different applications that I'm using, how am I looking at those and bringing them back to the products that I believe, what I know to be right, to the reports that I've already vetted and verified, that have correct documentation that tell you where it's come from, what the objective, what it is, who it's going to, how it's being shared, how often it's being updated. That defines a clear ownership structure. And so some of these things are as easy as, let me go export the amount of package tags out of metric. Let me make sure that my inventory there matches my inventory in another system. Did I get, do I have 1,000 orders in system A that match 1,000 invoices in system B? Just really simple calculations to just vet that we're all starting from the same foundation.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Sorry.
Well, what we really want to highlight, it's right in the middle of the screen, in fact, is the written approach to SOPs. I think if we don't, it's really easy to think of writing as a formality. I would encourage, it is not just a formality. It is actually something that causes the missing pieces to come out of the woodwork. Like it lets you know if people aren't participating, pretty easy. It lets you know if it lets you identify where there's gaps, where there's detailed nuances that aren't known. And of course, it deals with tribal knowledge. So I think, yeah, I think those are super key. And I think we're kind of low on time, or there's going to be a lot more conversation here as we go with a lot more subject matter that we've built out for these 12. But yeah, Josh, give it back
Thanks,
to
David.
you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And thank you, Dom and Rachel, for the insight into the data is lying. But, just as we kicked it off, and I'm just curious, like if one of you had to answer in a one-word response, is the data lying to you? I'd be curious what each of one of you would say. Dom?
Rachel, do you have one word? I think mine's no. I think mine's just no. It's
no.
Not. Yeah.
It might not be telling you the story you want to hear. It might be telling you that your accumulation processes are wrong or that your structure of your architecture is wrong, but it's not lying to you. It's just not telling you the story you want it to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, does
Don't
your
this business questions. If a transactional system is keeping a transactional rest system, it'll tell you what transactions were sold. Don't ask it. How the rest of my business is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and ask it questions that you've prepared it to answer. If you built yourself a mirror that's warped, expect it to warp just like you planned. Lie to your data to lie back. Put in junk, junk will come back to you. So really plan to use it the way that that you intend.
100%. And the goal again of the overarching theme of this whole series, and the reason we put it on, is the ability to kind of trying to streamline processes. So that falls under our standard operating practices place, and to leverage your technology stack in a meaningful way such that we are reducing those manual processes. We're streamlining the business. It's again, faster data into more hands in the company is really the win for a well-oiled machine. If everybody's looking off the same page and we're reading the same numbers, then we're making the same decisions. And that's really the goal, whether it's a process, a person, or a technology. They really all need to be pulling in and looking at the same information. So I really appreciate everybody joining us today. This is, again, this is the first in our set of 12, one per month. So it'll be the third week of each month we're going to be hosting these. And as I mentioned before, we will be having guests that come on board to really give us a nice flavor of what this particular topic, how it applies to them. So feel free to join us again next month. And on the third week, we'll start shooting some invites out of that coming up shortly. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and to our panelists, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.